Chapter 3 Under Ember. That morning, Dune had arrived at Pipeworks full of anticipation. This was the world of serious work at last, where he would get a chance to do something useful. What he learned in school and from his father and from his own investigations, he could put it all to good purpose now. He pushed open the heavy Pipeworks door and stepped inside. The air smelled strongly of dampness and moldy rubber, which seemed to him a pleasant, interesting smell. He strode up a hallway where yellow slickers hung from pegs on walls. At the end of the hallway was a room full of people, some of them sitting on benches and pulling on knee-high rubber boots, some struggling into their slickers, some buckling on tool belts. A raucous clamor filled the room. Dune watched from the doorway, eager to join, but not sure what to do. After a moment, a man emerged from the throng. He thrust out a hand. Lister Monk, Pipeworks director. You're the new boy, right? What size feet do you have? Large, medium, small? Medium, said Dune, and Lister found him a slicker and a pair of boots. The boots were so ancient that their green rubber was cracked all over as if covered with spider webs. He gave Dune a tool belt, too, which were wrenches, hammers, spools of wire and tape and tubes and some sort of black goop. You'll be in Tunnel 97 today. Arlen Frohl will go down with you to show you what to do. He pointed to a short, delicate-looking girl with white blonde braid down her back. She may not look like an expert, but she is. Dune buckled his tool belt around his waist and put on his slicker, which for some reason smelled like sweaty feet. This way, said Arlen without saying hello or smiling. She wove through the crowd of workers to a door marked stairway and opened it. The stone steps led so far down that Dune couldn't see the end of them. On either side was a sheer wall of a reddish stone glistening with dampness. There was no railing. Along the ceiling ran a single wire from which a light bulb hung every few yards. Water stood in shallow pools on each stair, and the hollow worn in the stones by years of footsteps. They started down. Dune concentrated on his feet. The clumsy boots made it hard not to stumble. As they went deeper, he began to hear a low roar. So low it seemed to hear it with more of his stomach than his ears. It grew louder and louder. Was it a machine of some kind? Maybe the generator? The stairway came to an end at the door marked Main Tunnel, and Arlen opened it. As they stepped through, Dune realized the sound he had been hearing wasn't a machine. It was the river. He stood just still, staring. Like most people, he had never been really sure of what the river was, just that it was water somehow flowed on its own. He imagined it would be like a clear, narrow stream that came out of the kitchen faucet, only bigger and horizontal instead of vertical. But this was something entirely different. Not a stream of water, but endless tons of it pouring by. Wide as the widest street in Ember, churning, dipping, swirling, the river roared past, its turbulent surface like black liquid glass scattered with flecks of light. Dune had never seen anything that moved so fast, and he had never heard such a thunderous, heart-stopping roar. The path they stood on was about 6 feet wide and ran parallel to the river farther than Dune can see in both directions. In the wall along the path were openings that must lead, Dune thought, to the tunnels that branched everywhere below the city. A string of lights like the one in the stairway hung high against the arched ceiling. Dune knew he was standing beneath the north edge of Ember. In school, you were taught to remember the directions this way. North was direction of the river, south was direction of the greenhouses, east was direction of school, and west was direction left over, having nothing in particular to mark it. All Pipeworks tunnels branched off from the main tunnel in the south towards the city. Arlen leaned towards Dune and shouted in his ear, "First, we'll go to the beginning of the river," she said. She led him up the main tunnel for a long way. They passed other people in yellow slickers who greeted Arlen and with a nod and glanced curiously at Dune. After 15 minutes or so, they came to the east edge of Pipeworks, where the river surged with a deep chasm in the ground, churning so violently that its dark water turned white and filled the air with spray that wet Dune's face. In the wall to the right was a wide double door. "See that door right there?" "Yes." "That's the generator room." "Can we go in?" "Of course not. You have to have special permission." She pointed back to the main tunnel. "Now we'll go to the end of the river." She led him back past the stairway door all the way to the west edge of the Pipeworks, where the river flowed into a huge opening in the wall that vanished into darkness. "Where's it go?" Arlen shrugged. "Back into the ground, I guess. Now let's find Tunnel 97 and get to work." She pulled a piece of folded paper from her pocket. "This is the map. You have one in your pocket, too. You have to use the map to find your way around here." The map looked to Dune like an immense centipede. The river arced across the top of the page like a centipede's body, and the tunnels dangled down from it like hundreds of long, long legs tangled up with each other. To get to Tunnel 97, they followed a complicated route through the passageways lined with crusty, rusted pipes that carried water to the buildings of Ember. Puddles stood on the floor of the tunnel, and water dripped down in brown rivulets down walls. Just as in the main tunnel, there were strings of bulbs along the ceiling that provided dim light. Dune occupied his mind by calculating how far underground he was. From the river to the ceiling of the main tunnel, it must be 30 feet or so, he thought. Above that were the storerooms, which occupied a layer at least 20 feet high. So that meant he was 50 feet underground with tons of earth and rock and buildings above him. The thought made him tense at his shoulders. He cast a quick glance upward as if the weight might collapse onto his head. Here we are, said Arlen. She was standing next to a leak that spurted a stream of water straight from the wall. We have to turn the shutoff valve, take the pipe apart, put in a new connector, and stick it back together again. With wrenches, hammers, washers, black goop, they did this, getting soaked in the process. It took him most of the morning and proved to Dune that the city was even worse shape than he suspected. Not only were the lights about to fail, and the supplies about to run out, but the water system was breaking down. The whole city was crumbling, and what was anyone doing about it? When lunch break came, Arlen took her lunch sack from her pocket and in her tool belt and went off to meet some friends in the tunnels. You stay right here and wait until I get back. If you wander around, you'll get lost. But Dune set out as soon as she disappeared. Using his map, he found his way back to the main tunnel and hurried to the east end. He wasn't going to wait for special permission to see the generator. He was pretty sure he could find a way to get in on his own. And he did. He simply stood by the door and waited for someone to come out. Quite soon, a stout woman carrying a sack lunch pushed the door open and walked away. She didn't notice him. Before the door closed, again, Dune slipped inside. Such a horrendous noise met him that he staggered back a few steps. It was an ear-splitting, growling, grinding, screaming noise shot through the hoarse, rackety sound of it underscored with a deep chugga, chugga, chugga. Dune clasped his hands over his ears and stepped forward. In front of him was a gigantic black machine, 2 stories high. It was vibrating so hard it looked as if it might explode any second. Several people wearing earmuffs were busy around it. None of them noticed him come in. He tapped on one on the shoulder, and the person jumped and whirled around. He was an old man, Dune saw, with deeply lined brown face. I want to learn about the generator, Dune screamed, but he might as well have saved his breath. No one could hear in such an uproar. The old man glared at him, made a shooing motion with his hand, and turned back around. Dune stood and watched for a while. Besides the huge machine were ladders on wheels that workers pushed back and forth, climbed up on to reach high parts. All over the room, greasy-looking cans and tools littered the floor. Against the wall stood big bins carrying every kind of bolt and screw and gear and lever and rod and tube, and all of them with age and jumbled together. The workers scurried between the bins and the generator or simply stood and watched the thing shake. After a few minutes, Dune left. He was horrified. All his life, he had studied how things worked. It was one of his favorite things to do. He could take apart an old watch and put it back together exactly as it had been. He understood how faucets in the sink worked. He fixed the toilets many times. He made a wheeled cart out of parts of an old armchair. He even had a hazy idea of what was going on in the refrigerator. He was proud of his mechanical talent. There was only one thing he didn't understand at all, and that was electricity. What was the power that ran through the wires and into the light bulbs? Where did it come from? He had thought if he could just get a look at the generator, he'd have a clue of what he needed. From there, he could begin to work on a solution that would keep the lights of Ember burning. But one glimpse of the generator showed him how foolish he was. He expected to see something whose workings he could understand. A wheel turning, a spark being struck, some wires that led from one point to another. But this monstrous roaring thing? He wondered if anyone understood how it worked. It looked as if it was going to, all they were doing was trying to keep it from falling apart. As it turned out, he was right. When the day was over and he was upstairs taking off his boots and slickers, he saw the old man from the generator room and went to talk to him. Can you explain to me about the generator? Can you tell me how it works? The old man just sighed. All I know is the river makes it go. But how? Who knows? Our job is to keep it from breaking down. If a part breaks, we got to put on a new one. If a part freezes up, we got to oil it. He wiped his hand wearily across his forehead, leaving a streak of black grease. I've been working on the generator 20 years. It's managed to chug along, but this year, I don't know. Things seems to break down every couple minutes. He cracked a wry smile. Of course, I hear we might run out of light bulbs before that, and then it won't matter if the generator works or not. Running out of light bulbs, running out of power, running out of time. Disaster was right around the corner. And that's what Dune was thinking when he stepped outside at the gathering hall on the way home and saw Lena on the roof. She looked so free and happy up there. He didn't know why she was on the roof, but he wasn't surprised. It was the kind of thing she did, turning up in unexpected places. And now she was a messenger. She could go just about anywhere. But how she could be so lighthearted when everything was falling apart? He headed for home. He lived with his father in a 2-bedroom apartment over his father's shop in Greengate Square. The small item shop was sold things like nails, pins, tacks, clips, springs, jars, jar lids, doorknobs, bits of wire, shards of glass, chunks of wood, and other small things that might be useful in some way. The small item shop had overflowed somewhat into their apartment above. In their front room, there were other people that might display a nice teapot on a table or a few attractive squashes or tomatoes on the shelf. They had buckets and boxes and baskets full of spare items for the shop, things that Dune's father had collected but not yet organized for selling. Often these items spilled onto the floor. It was easy to trip over things in the apartment, and not a good idea to go barefoot. Today, Dune didn't stop at the shop to see his father before going upstairs. He wasn't in the mood for conversation. He removed 2 buckets from the stuff of the couch, and it looked mostly like shoe heels, and flopped down on the cushions. He'd been so stupid to think he could understand the generator by looking at it, when other people had been working on it their entire lives. Thing was, he had to admit, he always thought he was smarter than other people. He'd been sure he could learn about electricity and save the city. He wanted to be the one to do it. He'd imagined many times a ceremony in Harkin Square organized to thank him for saving Ember. With the entire population in attendance and his father beaming in the front row, all Dune's life, his father had been saying to him, "You're a good boy, smart boy. You'll do grand things one day. I know you will." But Dune hadn't done much that was grand so far, and he ached to do something truly important, like finding the secret of electricity, and, as his father watched, be rewarded for his achievement. The size of the reward didn't matter. A small certificate would do, or maybe a badge to sew on his back jacket. Now he was stuck in pipeworks, patching up pipes that would leak and break in a matter of days. It was even more useless and boring than being a messenger, and the thought made him suddenly furious. He sat up, grabbed a shoe heel out of his bucket of seat, and hurled it with all his might. It arrived to the front door just as the door opened. Dune heard a hard thwack and ouch at the same moment. Then he saw a long, lean, tired-looking face of his father in the doorway. Dune's anger drained away. "Oh, I hate you, Father. I'm so sorry." Dune's father rubbed the side of his head. He was a tall man, bald and as a peeled potato, with his high forehead and long chin. He had kind, slightly puzzled eyes. "Got me in the ear. What was that?" "I got angry for a second. I threw one of the heels." I see. Does it have to do with your first day of work, son?" "Yes." "Why don't you tell me about it?" So Dune told him. When he finished, his father ran his hand across his bald head as if he was smoothing down hair that wasn't there. He sighed. "Well, sounds unpleasant, I have to admit. About the generator especially. That is bad news. But the pipeworks is your assignment. No way around it. It's what you get. What you do with what you get, though, that's more than important. The more the point, wouldn't you say?" He looked at Dune and smiled a bit sadly. "I guess so, but what can I do?" "I don't know. You'll think of something. You're a clever boy. The main thing is to pay attention. Pay close attention to everything. Notice what no one else notices. Then you'll know what no one else knows, and that's always useful." "How's the worm?" "I haven't looked at it yet," said Dune, and he went to his room and came out with a small wooden box covered with an old scarf. He set the box on the table and took the scarf off, and he and his father bent over and looked inside. A couple of limp cabbage leaves lay on the bottom of the box. On one of the leaves was a worm about an inch long. A few days before school ended, Dune had found the worm on the underside of a cabbage leaf he was slicing for dinner. Gross. It was a pale, soft green, velvety smooth all over with tiny stubby legs. Dune had always been fascinated by bugs. He wrote things down and wrote down his observations about them in a book entitled Crawly and Flying Things. Each page of the book was divided lengthwise down the center. On the left, he drew pictures with a pencil sharpened to a needle-like point. Moth wings, branching patterns of veins, spider legs which had minute hairs and tiny feet like claws, beetles with their feelers and glossy armor. On the right, he wrote what he observed about each creature. He noted what it ate, where it slept, where it laid its eggs, and, if he knew, how long it lived. This was difficult with fast-moving creatures like moths and spiders. To learn everything about them, he had to catch what glimpses he could as they lived their lives in the open. But if you put them in the box, they scrambled out for a few days and then died. This worm, though, was different. It seemed perfectly happy to live in the box Dune had made for it. So far, it did only 3 things. Eat, sleep, well, it looked like sleeping, though Dune couldn't tell if the worm closed its eyes, or even if it had eyes, and expel tiny black poops balls, and that was it. I've had it for 5 days now. It's twice as big as when I got it. It's eaten 2 square inches of cabbage leaf. You're writing this all down? Dune nodded. Maybe you'll find something interesting, new bugs in Pipeworks. Maybe, Dune said. But he thought to himself, no, that's not enough. I can't go plodding around Pipeworks, stopping leaks, looking for bugs, pretending there's no emergency. I have to find something important down there, something that's going to help. I have to. I just have to.